very privileged and happy to have Mr. L. Murthy, Deputy CEO at Dwara KGFS, one of India's leading microfinance institutions. Mr. Murthy, thanks for joining. First things first, I just wanted to check. I mean, on a personal level, is everything all right with you and your family? I mean, in these times, it's
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. You could edit this piece. Don't call it as microfinance institution because we are not an MFI NBFC. We are just an NBFC. So
all
you
right.
could say rural financial institution.
Rural
Uh,
financial.
Rural financial institution.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me for this podcast series. I'm doing good, and I hope you also are doing good.
I'm doing good, Murthy. Thank you so much. So the first thing I wanted to start with, I think before we started recording this podcast just now, you told me that Dwara is not exactly a microfinance institution. It's a NBFC serving the rural space. I wanted to unpack that a bit. So what is exactly the difference between an NBFC serving the rural space and say a microfinance institution? Because as far as I know, the products offered by you and microfinance institutions are common or are largely common.
So from a license perspective, what happens is that as under the RBI, you have an MFI NBFC license and you have an NBFC license.
Right.
So obviously, the MFIs have a different set of rules and procedures that they need to follow, and NBFCs have got a different rules to follow. But from a delivery perspective, yes, today you basically the markets are the same, but the processes, the underwriting norms, the products, those could be different. And obviously, for you know, the classification comes more from a legality perspective. That legally there is a separate certification for MFI NBFCs, and there's a separate certification for NBFCs.
Interesting. So, essentially, two paths to reach the same end goal in terms of financial product, or are there differences in the financial product itself?
There definitely would be differences in terms of the financial products because every institution has got a different product and different rates of interest, different underwriting norms, and different way of distribution mechanism. But the final objective obviously is to serve the customer who is underserved.
Right. So, I'm curious to know why someone would either say opt to be an NBFC in the rural space or a MFI in the rural space. From a regulatory perspective, what's the key difference, and why would one institution choose one path and another, say, Dwara, choose the other path?
Uh, See, what happens is that it depends from institution to institution. Obviously, MFI and BFCs, they have a different way of offering the interest rates because it is basis a formula which has been given by
Right,
RBI on the top five banks, their
right,
quarterly average rate and the MCLR that needs to be added. Whereas from a rating perspective, that kind of flexibility is there for NBFCs in terms of products. So I can give, we intend to be a multi-product originator. So that way, what happens is that those restrictions, we do not want restrictions where we are, we are not able to service the customer. So it gives us the flexibility in terms of products.
right. So, if I'm getting you correctly, the variety of products you can offer, is it correct to say that basically you can also offer the more conventional type of loan products that a NBFC can do as opposed to an MFI? It's not just micro loans necessary, but you can also offer other loan products. Is that
Precisely. That is the larger intent that, it gives us the flexibility to come up with innovative products. It helps us to design tailor-made products for the kind of customers that we are, working with.
right, 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 right. Um, so I'll put you on the spot a bit. If it in one line you could describe Dwara's value proposition to its customer, what would it be?
So we take pride in terms of calling ourselves as a wealth advisor for our clients. The very approach that we take in terms of building a relationship starts from the entire wealth management discussion that we have with our customers, irrespective of any kind of products, whether it is a asset-based product or a wealth management-based product. We start our conversation with something called as financial well. measurement, which where we try to capture individual details of the customer, the entire household details, where we capture their income, where we capture their expenses, assets, liabilities, their financial goals, their financial dreams. And basis that, it's a long conversation that we have with each customer, close to about 45 minutes of conversation, where we come up with a financial well-being report of every customer that we get associated with. And that financial well-being report actually then starts assisting us in terms of curating products as per the requirement. It captures the human capital value. It assists saying that what kind of protection covers that you need to take, what kind of savings that you need to do to achieve your goals. And there is a algorithm that has been created, that the system then basis the personas that we have created. We have been working for the last 10 years, and we have huge amount of data. So what we have done is that we use a couple of AI tools basis which algorithms actually curate the kind of requirement that the customer should have, plus the ability of the customer to take these products and ensure that they continuously service those products, they consistently renew the products. So that's how this entire package is made. So the relationship that we actually work in terms of developing with the customer starts from a financial well-being report of the customer in the household that gets generated. We work on 4 pillars, which is plan, grow, protect, and diversify. And depending on which stage the customer is, accordingly the products could be pitched, accordingly the other wealth management products could be pitched.
Interesting. So I'll come to the specific AI tools you use and generally how you've deployed AI for these purposes a bit later in the conversation. But I wanted to understand, when you're building the profile of the customer, is it nowadays it's a in fintech circles, there's a buzzword that, with AI and data and technology, you can get a complete profile of the customer in seconds with an algorithm. Does Vara operate purely on the data-led tech approach, or is there a kind of relationship manager actually asking their customer certain questions? And is that old school so-called traditional method of getting information? Does Dwara do that as well? Is it a mix? And if so, what is the proportion of the mix?
I would say it's a mix. We believe in relationship based. It's more relationship based in a sense that we have our wealth managers on the field who actually source the customer, who then individually have a conversation with the wealth manager, with the customers. And once the conversation happens, once the particular entire data points are captured, everything is captured into the system. Then the system basically helps and enables in terms of taking a decision. The subjectivity bit in terms of an individual giving a recommendation vis-a-vis a system giving a recommendation. So it gets married, that both the things are there. It is not that everything is done on the system. The initial conversation is more one-to-one.
So just looking at it from a completely layman perspective, this approach, I would think, would actually increase the time it takes for you to, maybe say acquire a customer or to actually do a transaction with a customer. So given sometimes there is a over focus on how can you cut down such processes, it's interesting to note that Dwara has not cut down on such processes, even at the risk of, taking a bit more time to service a customer. Is there any particular reason you've chosen to, do it this way?
See, the markets that we operate, the customer is not as evolved as an urban customer. And you need to basically, this is more of an assistance, technology assistance, where you need to give to your customer. You need to understand the customer. You need to make the customer also develop a relationship with the institution. So obviously, we are very particular in terms of the turnaround times and how fast can we deliver the services to the customer. But we also do understand that the first time conversation is very important conversation that we need to do with the individual as well as the household, so that we get to know them. And once you get to know them,
Right.
then you can start building on that.
Right. So are
And
your
it's an
products
investment.
differentiated?
We basically feel that it's an investment that you need to make onto the customer, so that we are able to understand what customer wants, what the desires of the customers are, and what is the ability of the customer to take those products, and then accordingly pitch our products, which is then system driven.
And I'm guessing also customized depending on the profile you have of a particular customer, more targeted
Precisely.
because of the information you have about the
Precisely.
customer. Right. Now, zooming out a bit into the industry, I would say as both MFIs and companies like Dwara have one thing in common, which is a primarily rural base of customers, or is it a mix of rural and smaller urban areas? Or is, I mean, conventional wisdom has it that primarily organizations like Dwara serve a primarily rural base. Is that true?
Yeah, we are completely a rural based organization. We work in tier 5, tier 6 villages. We do not operate even in semi-urban areas and urban areas. So it's completely into rural India.
So, Dwara, as you mentioned, you said it's kind of a wealth advisor for your customers. Would you say this is necessarily what all rural facing, I mean, do you think this is the best practice for a rural facing NBFC or MFI to adopt? Do you think that this is the key purpose that a rural facing NBFC or MFI solves for, the rural economy? Or are there different companies who have different pitches which are also, going down a different path but leading to the same end goal?
I think every organization has got a different way of looking at this particular market. It would be unfair for me to talk about others, but from our perspective, we feel that this is what we have been doing for the last 10 years. That's how we entered into this space, that, we basically look up to ourselves as a wealth advisor. We do not push any product to our customers. We understand the requirements of the customer and the household and accordingly pitch the products to them.
Right. And on a macro level, what would you say is the role of rural NBFCs and MFIs on a more macroeconomic scale? I mean, what is the role they play in the rural economy in India today? And is that evolving? How is that evolving, if so?
No, it definitely is evolving in a sense that, and evolving and has also evolved over a period of time. You basically are giving these are small ticket loans which these kind of customers they need. Obviously their requirements are such that formal financial institutions like banks may be able to service, may not be able to service. If they are able to service, then there is, these are all security backed loans that the banks would look at it. Whereas over here, we are going to the doorstep, understanding the customer and giving what they need, which is enabling them to do livelihood generation. And once they are doing the livelihood generation, the incomes are getting generated, the household incomes are multiplying, which actually is making the rural economy grow.
Interesting. So I was reading a very interesting statistic a few days back uh, that most customers of MFIs, about 85%, I don't know how true the statistic is, are women. Is this true for rural facing NBFC like Dwara as well? Is this just the nature of the industry?
Yeah, historically, see what happens is that our customer base is more woman focused customer base, but from a strategic point of view, we are also, that doesn't mean that we intend to stop lending to them, but we are also focusing on enterprise loans, individual loans, where we are more focusing in terms of three value chains, which is basically grocery, agri, and dairy. These are the three value chains that we are looking, and we are focusing in terms of developing our enterprise loan book also.
But I'm just curious to know, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners would also be curious to know why has it? I mean, why is the industry as a whole? Why does it? Uh, why is the primary customer base women? I mean, I'm just curious to know how that came about. Is it a concerted best practice? Did it just come about that way because of the nature of the loan product? I'm just curious to know, how this.
I see, obviously, because women, uh, I would say, are more disciplined in a sense that, they are more disciplined. And when you basically, the delivery model is a group loan kind of a model which works, that there are set times, set date on which you are supposed to come and you are supposed to pay every time, every month on that particular specified day. So ability to drive that particular discipline becomes a little bit more easier. Point number one. Point number two, what happens is that historically you look at it, the men folk usually go during the daytime onto their work or to the agricultural fields, and they have been working where they cannot leave that particular workspace and come back and take loans over here. So it was more that from a household perspective, it was women who were coming forward and taking a loan. I would put it that way, that I wouldn't say that men are bad to lend, because from an enterprise loan perspective, we are looking at both men and women. But I think
Right.
it was more from the cultural aspects, the work timings and all that stuff, that women were more at the home. And when we were going door to door, or when we were giving a doorstep delivery, it was far more easier for institutions to service them.
That's interesting. That's interesting to know. So, a last question on the industry. Uh, there's a there's a concept of small finance bank as well. Is that kind of, so what's the difference between an SFB, NBFC like Dwara and MFI? I've read a lot. I mean, but these are conventional, normal papers. It's not really industry specific papers that MFIs are often looking to become SFBs, or RBI is prodding some institutions to become SFBs. What is this all about? Is it just legal lingo? I mean, is there really no practical difference?
No, I think it is more that SFPs get a benefit of also accepting deposits,
Deposits.
opening bank accounts. So obviously that enables them to uh, I would say that funding requirement can be taken care of with the kind of deposits that they are raising. Whereas NBFCs or MFI NBFCs, they have to just lend. They cannot take deposits until and unless you are a deposit taking NBFC. So that definitely is a big shift in terms of SFBs being able to provide banking services also. While you are providing banking services, you can also assist the customers in terms of opening a savings bank account, a fixed deposit or a recurring deposit, and you could enable the customer to save money with them. Whereas from an NBFC perspective, what happens is that right now, from a regulatory aspect, we can only lend them. We cannot actually take any of their money and take it as a deposit or a saving.
Right. Right. Interesting. Interesting. So now I want to come to a more specific current, issue, not just with MFI industry, but with the world in general, the pandemic. So I just wanted to understand, because at the risk of sounding cliche, because I know in all conversations these days this comes up in conversation, but I still think it's a very important thing to talk about for audiences to hear. I just wanted to understand, how did COVID-19 impact the MFI rural serving NBFC space? What would you say are the like one or two key how ways in which it affected this
No,
industry?
the minute the pandemic hit and there was a restriction in terms of physical movement, we were not able to go and meet our customers. That was the biggest uh, problem that we had, or that was the biggest challenge that we had, that we were not able to meet the customers. Customers were not able to meet because there was a movement restriction, point number
So
one.
just to clarify, just to step in there for listeners who don't know, uh, when you say meeting the customers, you mean your daily agents, the dispersal agents, the general point of contact. It's not over a phone call or something like that. It's actual physical meeting in the villages.
Absolutely. So the sourcing is that it's a more of a physical sourcing, that
Yeah,
we go to the village, there we speak to the
yeah,
customers, and
yeah.
even in terms of collection, this particular set of customers were handling more of cash, because their economic value chain, where their earnings are there, it all happens in cash. It's not digital. So the entire collection process was happening in cash. Though we were trying to put in digital collection modes, the disbursement chain became digital. That the while you are disbursing it into the savings bank account, whereas while collecting,
Right.
you are collecting it in cash. So till the time pandemic didn't hit, it was a smooth affair, that you had a rhythm where every month, if it is a monthly loan, every month on a set date at the set time, you were going there. Customers used to come over to a designated place, and they all used to deposit their monthly EMIs, and the conversation used to happen in terms of the wealth manager and the customers. But suddenly, with pandemic coming in and the restrictions being put in, it became very difficult for them to pay, point number one, and for us to collect. That was the first problem. The second problem was that everyone's incomes also got impacted, because they were just not able to go and
Right.
work wherever that they were working, whether be it a daily wage earner or they were doing some kind of a business. Their incomes also got impacted, because of which it impacted the entire ecosystem.
Interesting. So when you told me about how the most of the collections happen in cash, unlike you would say more conventional lending modes in the urban areas, I would think. I mean, I'm just thinking back to 2016 as well. With demonetization, you would have faced the same issue, at least on the first aspect of them being unable to pay you back in cash. Did the response to that kind of make this industry more prepared for this?
I would say it did definitely help. What happens is that these kind of events actually uh, enables the organization to think forward. And, then you start thinking, if at all these kind of events happen, then how do we behave? So the resilience has to be built in. So Demon definitely taught us in terms of how do you touch base the customer? How do you then individually start calling the customers? Because every customer has got a different need or way to be serviced. And so the biggest learning was that keep the basics simple and keep the basics right, that contact the customer, be in touch with your customer, be on the mobile, be on the phone, or if you're able to even meet physically, please be in touch with your customer, understand the customer, and don't leave everything onto the customer thinking that the customer would come to you. We also need to go back to the customer. So events does help the organization in terms of building systems, processes, and strategies, keeping future in mind.
Right, right. Interesting. So I'm just curious to know if how did you solve is the shock of, I mean, demon is obviously over now, but now we're in the pandemic. Is the cash flow coming back in repayments? What's the current status of the industry with regard to that issue?
See, these are two separate events, though it did impact the entire industry. In my personal view, during demonetization, there was a shortage of currency, but there was definitely no impact as such on the incomes.
Incomes.
Whereas over here, during COVID, what has happened is that incomes got impacted, because of which there was a shortage of money at their every individual. There was, people didn't have that much of money, or whatever little that they had, they were holding on to themselves, because they were not very sure as to when would the movement restrictions be lifted, when would the lockdown go, when would they go back to work. So that's the basic difference in terms of the two events that have happened. Obviously, because the minute this event happened, it came as a shock for everybody, because this kind of events never happened in the past. You did
Right.
have an experience of facing a cyclone or a flood, or some kind of an event where there was a temporary blockage for a couple of days. But over here, you had a complete blockage of almost a month and a half. Then obviously, post that, government came up with the moratorium initiative, and then 6 months moratorium was given. So it all had every day was an impactful event day, kind of a thing, that something or the other was happening. And obviously, you also have to ensure that your staff are safe, because COVID was
Correct.
rising. You also need to take care that if your staff is moving out, it shouldn't impact the society, that the staff is spreading COVID. So we were very cautious. So what we did is that we stopped collections the minute the restrictions were put in. And after April 19th, when the first lockdown was lifted, we launched AEPS services, which is Aadhaar enabled payment
Aadhaar
services. That we
enabled
have
payments.
BCs with a couple of banks, and we launched those services, and we said that what is the most painful thing that the customer is right now facing. It was shortage of cash, not being able to go to the bank or recover money. So that we put the AEPS services, we communicated to all our customers that if you're wanting to withdraw cash, you could also come to Dwara branch and withdraw cash. And as and when we were able to move on to the field, we were going to their villages and assisting the customers to withdraw cash, so that their regular day-to-day activities are taken care of. And as things started moving from June, July onwards, people started going out on work. Agriculture as a whole didn't get much impacted, that the sowing season started happening, and people started going on to the field, they started getting work, so the income started coming in and people started paying. And as we see, post July onwards, customers started coming on their own and started paying, because this set of customers, they are very clear that their intent is very good in terms of not holding back money. They are very aware about the credit history getting an impact in terms of if they do
Okay.
not pay. So, and because they also need loans, and today what happens is that every loan that you give, you basically fire their credit bureau reports and check whether the customer is a good paying customer or a bad paying customer. So obviously, every customer would like to have a good credit history. So from June, July onwards, we started seeing customers coming back and paying.
So that's an interesting digression I want to go in because you just brought it up. Because there's a common, I mean, a misconception that things like credit history, it's a kind maybe an elitist misconception that rural customers and all don't know about these things and they can fall prey to predatory loans. But what you said is very interesting that they are keenly aware of how credit ratings work. how credit history works. How has this come about? Is this by education, by organizations like you, or is it just self-interest that they are forced to learn about it if they're lending from formal channels?
I think I would give credit to all the institutions who basically lend. That post Andhra crisis, when it was made mandatory that credit reporting has to be done, credit bureaus were incorporated, and every institution has to share the information of all the customers whom they are lending, and also take the records back to see whether are the customers paying to other institutions properly or not. So that kind of culture built in, but at the same time, all institutions also took the initiative of educating the customers. I think a lot of effort has gone from the regulators, from SROs, which is self-regulatory organization, which is MFIN, all the lending institutions, that keeping credit history and culture, credit culture, being credit positive is very important for you to get the next loan. And if you do not pay, it will spoil your credit rating. So I think a lot of educational work has gone, where customers have been educated, and as part of the process of giving group loans and all that stuff, many institutions have the CGT, which is continuous group training processes, which they basically have for 1 day, 2 days, varies from institution to institution, where they educate the customer in terms of having a positive credit rating.
That's very interesting to hear. A digression from my list of questions I had, but I think it was a valuable discussion. So it's good you brought up the Andhra crisis. I wanted to ask a bit about that, not about that specifically, but I read somewhere that a lot of people saw the Andhra crisis as a crisis that should not be wasted, and as a result there were a lot of regulatory responses solidifying and making the process more robust. As you mentioned, increased credit education, a mandate of informing customers about the credit history, and as you said, now it's actually made a difference where customers are aware of it, so it's made a positive impact. So a reform kind of out of that crisis, a structural reform out of that crisis has kind of improved the industry. What structural reforms like that do you see coming out of the COVID crisis? Or what would you like to see coming out of the COVID crisis from a structural perspective in the
I
MFI
think
space?
COVID, what has happened is that what we could have done in the next coming 1 to 2 years, COVID has actually fastened up this entire process. I think slowly the digital transformation that everybody has been talking about is something which is now happening. Post Andhra crisis, post demon, multiple changes have happened in terms of the delivery part. And that delivery part was more from a disbursement perspective, that the disbursements became digital, where especially with Jandhan coming in, every individual are having a bank account, because their DBTs are being put directly into the account. So the habit of doing a banking transactions started happening that side. But what has happened is that the collection part, the second part of the value chain, was still happening in cash. Now with COVID coming in, one of the learnings that we have is what happens in a situation where if there are certain movement restrictions, how do you ensure from an institution perspective is that the customer has money not being able to pay, but are we able to give them methods and tools where the customer can pay digitally? So that's what is the biggest systemic change that I would say that COVID has done in terms of collecting money digitally. The second thing also is that some amount of there is always a fat in the process. How do you basically lean the process? By bringing in some more digital tools. Can we look in terms of the physical CGTs that were happening, that I actually, and in physical CGT, what do? You educate the customer. Can I make it more digital, that we could have a video call? Now today most of the customers, all rural customers, are slowly adopting smartphones, or every household has got one smartphone. Can I look in terms of sending a video of what is CGT, what is credit culture, what is the things to do, and what are the things not to do? So this education series can also become digital. So I think a lot of opportunities have got opened, which would enable most of the organizations to reach up to the customer in a much faster way. But then it will definitely take some more time, that you got to basically assist your customer in terms of adopting the new technologies, because these are customers are getting evolved. These are customers who are in the range of who are in the average age of say 25 to 45, their ability to pick up things is a little slower when compared to a younger customer who is in the age gap of 18 to 25. So I think a lot of opportunities have kind of opened up, especially after COVID coming in.
So I'm glad you brought up digital transformation, because that segues nicely into the next segment of what I was going to ask you, which is technology, and which will form the bulk of our remaining discussion. Uh, you mentioned that there's a huge opportunity for digital transformation as a form of deep structural change in how MFIs and rural NBFCs operate. And you mentioned, the various digital tools that can be used to make the process easier, that will circumvent not just COVID restrictions, but would be beneficial even after COVID, in a post-COVID era. So I just wanted to understand from you, what do you think are the essential technology tools that MFIs and rural NBFCs need to adopt today? Uh, COVID is obviously forcing them to adopt it, but that everyone should adopt anyway, even if COVID had not happened.
See, I think we need to respect the customer's time. Today, what is happening is that if you do not move towards digital transformation, what we are expecting is that customers should wait for you at the doorsteps where you go do your process of due diligence, do the process of documentation, and all that stuff. So that is one part. If you go little back, go a couple of years back, the women folk. One of the reasons why the earlier conversation that we were having is that why do we lend it to women? We said that
Yeah.
women were more doing cottage kind of an business, that they were more sitting at home and doing businesses. But today the woman has started moving out of the houses. Their education levels are improving across geographies. People have started going to work now because of our processes. You shouldn't make them lose their wages, because every day they go for daily wages kind of work, and any delay from our side shouldn't impact their daily wages. So can we get in processes which actually could be done digitally? Though there are certain processes where you would have to do a physical one-to-one meeting, but processes which could be done digitally, I think that would enable the customer not to lose much. And it
Right.
also brings in a lot of efficiency from an organization's point of view, that a lot of fat is getting removed. You get a lot of checks and balances from a compliance point of view. You eliminate a lot of risks. The mitigation of risk could be done using other means to figure out whether is the customer genuine or not. Today, in the past, what was happening is that I had to go have a look at you, that is the photo matching with
Photo
you
matching.
physically? Is the customer the same customer? Now today there are ways and means to check all that. Know your customer. Today I can electronically know my customer, and as I have moved towards digital disbursement, can I actually do the KYC authentication and verification digitally? So I think as the ecosystem has evolved in the last couple of years, these new processes would enable the organizations to deliver far better in a far efficient way, and the customer also benefits.
Right. Right. That's true. That's true. I mean, in a sense, time is a very important factor. And you're right in saying, I think I agree with you that, technology can just make the experience more, I mean, a more pleasurable experience, like how,
Absolutely. And we need to respect the time of the customer,
yeah,
It shouldn't be that the
yeah,
customer kind of keeps waiting for you. And I
correct.
think as much as we are sensitive to time, we are sensitive to work, and we have our own way of doing business, I think the customer also has. And it shouldn't end up that the customer should feel that if I'm taking a loan from an institution, it is actually impacting my daily wages, or it is impacting my physical movement, and I'm not being able to do things that I was supposed to do today. So the customer should feel that pain and the pinch.
That's a interesting insight, which I never thought of. And I'm feeling a bit guilty of never having thought of it that way. But now that you mention it, I mean, it's quite striking, because for urban customers and people like us in the middle class, for us, digital makes it more convenient. It's avoiding the hassle. But for your customer profile, the time taken for the hassle of a non-digital process actually directly impacts their wages. Like it's a direct daily wage bread and butter issue, not just a hassle-free hassle uh, experience. It's
Absolutely. And
actually a
I think as the
direct economic benefit.
Absolutely. And as the income levels are improving, I'm sure everybody would like to have their own privacy also,
Yeah.
In the earlier days, what was happening is that you are doing or asking questions in front of everyone. There could be that some people are a little bit sensitive in terms of not sharing their personal information. Now, how do you give that kind of benefit to the customer? So I think this kind of digital transformation would help in terms of uh, giving that kind of space to the customer where the customer does not want their information to be leaked outside.
And they can choose when they, want to deal with the agent. I mean, via technology, they can choose the agencies with them.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, I think, AI to kind of build the customer profile and identify the customer's pattern. You mentioned eKYC, and I know Dwara is also using eSign now. But are there any other technologies that also come into the picture in this
No, we are working on
transform?
various tools. Yes, in the process of building it, obviously, we are a distributor and there are dependencies with a lot of other institutions where you got to do take the APIs, connect with their APIs, do the system check, do the UATs and all that stuff. So we are using most of it. Like as I mentioned, we do e-sign, which is what has enabled customers, the pain of signing on multiple pages and all that stuff. That is one. The impact that we are actually from a sustainability perspective, a lot of paper is getting saved. That is one. Digitally, you can save paper. Earlier, you were using a physical paper, scan it, keep it into the system, and also store those papers. So from environmental perspective, if you look at it, I think it's a green way of going and saving paper. Point number one. So we have moved to eSign. We are doing eKYC authentication as we have BCs, and we also enable the customers to do AEPS transactions. So we can always, do a cross check in terms of their names on the bank, because banks have already done the KYC of the customer. So, and we are going to do a digital disbursement. So we do the cross check through eKYC penny drop facility that, yes, this is the set of customer. We are also moving towards, obviously, most of the customers have started, as I was mentioning, that at least every household will have a smartphone. So we are enabling our customers getting into WhatsApp chatbot that, into their local languages, that in case they have any grievances or they have any issues, they could always get back to us through a WhatsApp chatbot, rather than, calling a toll-free call center, which anyways, toll-free call center is also open, but here ability to reach is much, much more faster. And we
Right.
are also evaluating various forms of using videos through smartphones and seeing that how can we reach to the customer much more faster, educate the customer much more faster. Can we look in terms of creating self-service apps as we move, uh, in terms of the customer is able to know exactly all the details that the customer wanted to know from loan, in terms of how much of EMIs are left, what is the kind of portfolio out, what is the outstanding that is left. In case if the customer wants an additional loan or an emergency loan, they could always electronically get back to us, rather than, walking all the way to the branch or waiting for the wealth manager to come on that particular designated day.
Right, right. So a follow-up to this, I wanted to ask you, because you're talking about seems to me that customers are receptive to tech processes. Is this true for some, not true for others? What has been the reception like in rural areas? Because a conventional wisdom, uh, again, conventional wisdom, just from a layman's perspective, is it's harder to sell technology to customers in these segments. Um, how
No,
do they
that's
adopt? How do
true.
they react to technology?
That's true. It all depends in terms of how easy, simple, and intuitive is your technology. And if it is easy, intuitive, and you are able to speak in their language, ability to adapt has been very, very high. And we have seen from AP crisis to demon crisis to the pandemic, COVID pandemic time, I think customers really have changed much, much faster than what the institutions probably would have changed. So I would definitely say that we have been very lucky enough that this set of customers, because see, they are also in need of these products and services. And for that requirement, their ability to, and they also know that if we do not change, probably we will not get it. And all these changes have brought efficiency in their own way of doing things, in the day-to-day things. It has saved time, it has saved effort. The Earlier they were getting loan, after they apply in 10 days. Today they are able to get loans in 3 days. They
3
are
days.
able to know their credit ratings immediately on the fly. Whereas earlier, it used to happen that, okay, fine, I will do the credit check at my office, figure out whether it is a positive credit or a negative credit. At least the customer is able to know on the fly, will the customer get a loan or not get a loan,
Right,
rather than
right,
waiting,
right.
couple of days to exactly know, yes, my loan has been approved.
So how do you think this technological receptiveness has come over? I mean, the customers are, coming to you preferring technology, or is it that there is a lot of education going on by, institutions like Dwara also saying, we are going to now serve you in this manner. This option is available to you. This is how it will work. And then they receive it. Or is technology just permeating naturally? I just wanted to understand if, technology, you're finding technology where you go rather than
See,
you kind of
technology is the
giving it.
medium that you're using, but the basic underlying thing is trust. On the trust that you have actually created with the customer starts trusting that, yes, this is the institution. If they are doing any changes or if they are coming up with new initiatives, it is in my interest, that it will actually help me. Now that education, that hand holding that we basically do from Dwara's side is what is actually pushing the customers also to change. Obviously there are certain set of customers who take more time than some customers who adapt to this kind of technologies. So it also depends in terms of their household, what kind of DNA that they are made of. Some are little risky in terms of adapting to faster in terms of adapting to new technologies or new initiatives. Some are little, they wait for others to basically do. They allow others to try and test, and then they
Right.
adapt.
Like all tech-led adoptions, there are the early trendsetters and the followers.
Precisely. And there are some fence sitters who basically say, okay, let me hang on. We'll see how things shape up, and accordingly, I will, adapt.
Right. Nice. So do they need I mean, is it that, like if a household has a smartphone, like they need a smartphone to do this? Or I'm guessing Dwara also does an assisted model. Or as you mentioned, Dwara does an assisted model where the agent will kind of take the tablet. So you don't even need a smartphone in the house to actually use technology to serve a particular customer.
No, it works both ways. That not necessarily that every household would have a smartphone. Point number one. Even if there is a smartphone at a household, it might be with the spouse or children or somebody. The other customer might be using a feature phone. So it works both ways. That there are some set of customers who have learned, who have become educated, and they know how to use that. That they will probably do it on their own. There are some set of customers who basically need some more assistance. That is point number one. Point number two, it also depends in terms of what kind of medium are you using. If you're using a UPI handle, you can do it on your own. If you're using an Aadhaar Pay, then obviously assisted model would work, that you got to put your biometric and wait for the OTP to come. So it works both ways.
Just as a ballpark, I mean, obviously, I know you won't have the exact figure. What is the percentage of customers who opt or who are able to, do self-serve tech model, and what are the percentage who require an assisted model right now?
I would say right now it is about, see, a couple of places where households where children are little, going to college or have started working. Those kind of households are, their ability to adapt has been faster when compared to households where there are not many people who could assist inside the house, saying that, okay, this is how it needs to be done. But to give you, I think early days, but I would still say, with whatever that we are able to collect digitally, I think I would say close to about 20% would be doing it on their own. Remaining 80%, we really need to assist them and help them.
Right. I have a slightly selfish question to ask now, because as you know, part of our product relies heavily on Aadhaar technology, a portion of it. I just wanted to, out of curiosity, this is just for my our own information at Legalities. What is the actual Aadhaar and mobile penetration, Aadhaar connected mobile phone penetration in, as you mentioned, tier 4, tier 5 rural areas?
See, Aadhaar is there for every individual today. So that way, be rest assured that I think before, every customer today in rural India has got an Aadhaar, because every customer had to open a Jan Dhan account and all DBTs were happening and they were all linked to a customer should have an Aadhaar to avail the subsidies. So from that perspective, you look at it, I think two good things have happened in the country. One, Aadhaar being there, which enables the identification of an individual, and obviously with Jan Dhan coming in, every individual has got a bank account.
Bank account.
So I would say 100% of the customers would have both this. In terms of mobile numbers linked to those Aadhaar, that is a challenge, because we also need to realize that in the past the Aadhaar enrollment happened on a project mode where institutions used to go to village by village and put up camps, and they used to enroll the customers for Aadhaar. And at that point of time, if the household was not having an Aadhaar, that particular institution which was enrolling was helping them by
Getting
whatever
the
Aadhaar.
Aadhaar, helping them get the Aadhaar.
Precisely. But over a period of time, what has happened is, as these banks, DPTs started happening, Aadhaar seeding also happened along with the bank account number. So most of the customers today have started realizing that whatever mobile number that they are having should be there in the bank account. But still there is a gap in terms of, mobile number which has been registered at the time of taking an Aadhaar to the mobile number that they are having. So it could be different. Point number one. Point number two,
Right.
in rural India, we should also realize, unlike postpaid, it is people who prefer prepaid.
Right.
From a technology service providers, I think they feel more comfortable in terms of a prepaid in those markets
Right.
rather than postpaid.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
then what happens is that depending on the new schemes that are coming in and all that stuff, people kind of keep shifting from one service provider to another service provider.
Right. Right. That's interesting. I really enjoyed this conversation we had on the customer and how they uh, react to technology, because a lot of people who are not in the industry make very we make educated assumptions on it, but we don't know the actual reality. So this was very insightful, a peek into how the customer is actually responding to technology, how technology can be used to actually give a economic impact, not to Dwara or not to institutions, but actually to the customer.
Actually, I would also add one thing that for us, we didn't find that very difficult, because from the time we started, we were very tech dependent organization. We kind of, from the beginning, we were highly dependent on technology. Our entire enrollment process was completely on the tech. So, and all our offices were wired from a connectivity perspective, that, though the penetration of technology service providers has really gone up in the last couple of years. But when we started 10 years back, availability of bandwidth was not there. So we actually had put up towers on top of our branch offices to pull connectivity.
Wow.
And we did, bear a lot of costs. But we were very clear that the delivery has to be completely tech driven, because we realized that that really enables us to deliver much more efficiently and much more faster. So having done that, our customers know that Dwara is little bit more tech oriented, and the processes are more tech oriented. So we didn't find that much of a challenge. But obviously, if you have to completely shift to technology based, uh, you know, the entire leg of this business, if it has to move to technology, the ecosystem also needs to move to technology, in a sense that today what is happening is that still 95% of our customers, their wages are paid in cash.
Right.
They're
Right.
on cash, though now slowly things are changing with Paytms, Google Pay, and all that coming in, but still majority of the transactions in rural India happen on cash.
Right. Right. So I want to come to that specifically on Dwara and technology, and that will be the last segment of this podcast. But before that, I wanted to just touch upon a wider industry-wide issue. But we'll stay on this topic, because we'll come to this topic because I intend to ask you more detail about it. I just wanted to understand. We were earlier talking about technology and how it enhances the customer experience and actually saves time for them. Now, from the NBFC perspective or the MFI perspective, obviously there are time savings, as you mentioned, for both the NBFC and the customer. If time is saved, it's safe for both parties. I want to understand, there are two other issues which I think are common in the MFI industry from a lot of people we've spoken to. One is there's a traditionally high customer acquisition cost that MFIs and rural NBFCs faced. And the second is because of the reliance on the agent model or the business correspondent model, there's a lot of factors out of the control of, say, the institution, that you're reliant on the agent on the ground. So that safeguarding against agent fraud is a big issue. I want to understand if technology plays a role in reducing CAC, or does technology actually increase CAC when you have to spend on technology? When you have to invest in technology, does it increase actually the cost of the customer and you just do it because it saves time, or does it actually even reduce the CAC at some level?
No, I would say, see, every innovation comes with a cost. And
Right.
obviously that cost also, you would do a cost benefit analysis and figure out that is it really worth investing. Now there are some investments which are probably keeping in mind the future, that you invest today and you start getting benefits out of that. But the question that you were asking in terms of agents and the risk, we do not have any agents on the field. The entire process is done by our own field staff. So as it is completely
Okay.
done on the our front end system, and everything is being captured, so the amount of frauds in terms of customer related are very far and few.
Because there's a visibility because you're using the
Absolutely,
Dwara
there are
platform.
hardly
Okay.
anything in terms of when I'm onboarding a customer, that I'm onboarding a wrong customer, because there are
Right.
checks and balances that are there.
You're doing a pre-fill from your systems. There's
Absolutely,
automatic data population and
absolutely.
right. So systemically, uh, the technology would seem to have the potential of, I'm not, if used rightly, reduce the chances of fraud.
It
And
does.
that,
It does. See, it helps in two ways. One, it enables you to
I'll tell you
have
where
it.
I'm coming from in this question. I just, sorry to interrupt. I'll tell you where I'm coming from is there's a lot of, when we had the Paytm scandal with KYC, where the one KYC was being used for other purposes, it was all largely attributed to because you're moving to digital, such frauds are happening. I want to understand the other perspective on that.
So what happens is today, see, one of the basic differences in our business is that the KYC that you are taking, that KYC is used for multiple purposes, and it is not one single KYC that we take. We take a Aadhaar card, we take a voter ID card. We also do a lot of reference checks in terms of the neighbors, their longevity of stay. We lend to people. We look at the electricity bills and all that stuff. So one check that happens. Thereafter, what happens is with this KYC, I also do a credit bureau check. So there are primary checks and secondary checks that happen as part of the credit bureau test also. And with now eKYC coming and doing a check with regard to the bank account and the individual, so the fraud of a wrong Aadhaar or a wrong customer getting onboarded gets kind of removed.
Right. So
So
technology, when
obviously
used right, has
there could be
actually,
some typo errors or some kind of errors that might come in, and you might have one or two rare cases, but majoritarily, if you look at it, all these systems and processes are enabling us to remove the kind of a ghost customer or a wrong customer that you actually were wanting to do business with.
right. Interesting. So now I will come to, we'll come to the last segment in this. Uh, what technology you mentioned, Dwara being from the start itself a tech-led or rather heavily tech-integrated institution. So what technologies does Dwara? Actually, we covered this, I think, but what led Dwara to starting off as tech-led? What wisdom informing that decision?
Now, if I understand you, you're asking what systems are we using?
Uh, that, but I think we covered that actually in a previous part of the conversation. If you want to add anything to that, sure. But I think we've actually, it's naturally been covered. I just want to understand what was the philosophy behind starting off Dwara as a heavily tech integrated.
I think the thing that we always, one of the mission and vision thing is being customer centric and access to financial services. So looking at the background of our promoters had come from bank. and they wanted to give that kind of visibility and services to our customer, that when the customer walks into a branch of Dwara, they feel that it shouldn't be that intimidating, that the entire outlook of the branch is intimidating to the customer, but keep it very simple, and all kind of services are offered through that particular branch. And that's the reason where I said that we are a multi-product originator in terms of assets as well as in terms of wealth management products. That from day one, we were it was not required that a customer should walk into a branch only to take a loan. If the customer wanted to open a bank account, we were, as a BC, because we are a business correspondent with a couple of banks, the customer can just come and open a bank account. If the customer wants to take some insurance product, the customer could take an insurance product. We were at one point of time, we were one of the biggest aggregators for pension fund, PFRDA, till the time regulations came, and they said that NBFCs cannot be distributing pension funds. So the customer could walk into the branch and take a NPS product. So all this while we were doing, because of being a multi-product originator, we needed to have a system, because what will happen is, as part of omni-channel delivery that we intend to give the customer, and if the customer has got multi-products, you can't do it on a manual basis. You got to have a system which would enable us to have a complete 360-degree view of the customer. Having said that, I would go back that our interaction with the customer begins through the coming out with that financial well-being report. Now, that financial well-being report is a report which the system generates. So we had to be technology driven from the day one.
So naturally, I would think that because you are technology driven from day one, there have been certain internal processes that have been set up to evaluate and procure technology. I know a lot of our listeners are interested in this, but how exactly does Dwara make decisions on technology procurement and evaluation? Because in a lot of places, it can be a very time, this itself can be a cost of actually adopting technology, the evaluation and procurement process. So how does Dwara handle it, or how does Dwara deal with it? And what is the biggest challenge in actually adopting technology that you face?
So when we look at technology should, what we basically look at is that technology should help the company and technology should help the customer also. You can't have a technology where the customer is not able to adapt.
Right.
That is one. So the technology system facing the customer has to be very simple, very intuitive, ability for the customer to understand and adopt. That is the simple lead. So the front end has to be that very easy. The back end, we basically look at technology which could enable us to break the data, metadata that we collect, and enables us to do multiple things with those particular data points, so that I could actually break that and go back to customer in a way that I understood that data and start speaking to the customer. So that is what we look in terms of technology, that technology from a customer's point of view and technology from an institution's point of view. In terms of decision making, we internally have a digital core committee where we put up all the projects. We discuss, we look in terms of we look at the priorities, what should be prioritized, what shouldn't be prioritized, and can it go a little back. And it is the digital core committee which actually, then we have a separate board committee on IT. So then we go back to the IT board committee, present our findings, and then a decision is taken.
What's the average turnaround time for this process? Because I know in some companies it takes up to a year to do all this.
I think the classic thing is that, as I mentioned, April lockdown happened on March 22nd, March 23rd, and by mid of April, we came up with all the digital collection modules. We implemented e-sign. So that's itself, you were one of our vendors, and the way we quickly turned it around, it gives you a understanding in terms of how fast do we make a decision, how fast are we in terms of making a decision.
True. It was actually very fast. I mean, compared to, quite frankly, a lot of organizations similar size to Dwara, it takes a lot of time. So it was, we were also very surprised, given, but it is very heartening also to see.
Thank you.
As a tech platform ourselves. And what would you say, though, is the biggest challenge, maybe not just facing Dwara, but that you think in the industry to adopt technology? What is the biggest challenge in that procurement and evaluation process?
I think, the biggest challenge is that all this while you were basically a lending institution. Now, how do you become a technology-driven lending institution, and you got to have that competency built inside?
Right.
I think The challenge in terms of building that competency inside, which is what we did, that we have a separate team rather than depending on outsiders or vendors, that then you start depending on vendors, their technology, and multiple different systems coming in and
Right.
talking. What we did is that we invested heavily in terms of our own technology team, in-house technology team. The front end was created, that we gave them the linkages with API, so that the loan management system, which is the back end and the front end, are on the same platform. It is just that you are integrating with various technology service providers. So we invested heavily in terms of our tech team. And obviously, the biggest challenge is to get the right set of people and right set of partners, because when you're collaborating with a partner, the partner also should be in sync with what you are wanting to do, and their partner also needs to have the patience of, because these are going into a market where the customer has to adopt, has to change, and then start flowing. It's not that, unlike urban markets where you put in a system, it starts rolling from day one. So you also have to basically start looking and exploring that, does the partner also have the similar kind of vision and mission, that they have the patience to work along with you and see that, yes, this goes in terms of creating an impact for the society. So finding out correct partners, finding out the correct technology, and doing it and taking it on the field and making your customer understand. These are a couple of challenges that I feel.
Right, right. Makes sense. I mean, if you don't have the right, if your evaluation process, as you mentioned, if the evaluation is operating on incorrect premises, then whatever technology you adopt will create challenges down the line. And as you said,
And
if that evaluation itself is operating on the right premises, that is uh, maybe not half the challenge, but that opens up a easier path.
absolutely.
To
And I think during this process, you also need to be a little bit cost sensitive, that, you go ahead with the technology which is so costly that after having invested, you shouldn't feel that, it's not making sense for me to run on such high technology where I'm not able to make, profits out of that. So you got to be very cautious in terms of how is it going to help me in terms of releasing the bandwidth of my field team, that I am able to increase their productivity. How is it helping my customer in terms of easing out their pain points, and at the same time get efficiency in my entire systems and processes.
right, right. So, and, as a final to just wrap up this segment, I just wanted to ask you, what is on your tech wish list for the industry in the next 3 years, or predictions on what will come in that is not there now from a technology perspective?
Very difficult to question, because the technology is evolving so fast that, today every second day you see a innovation coming in. But obviously, I think all the manual processes that we do in terms of trying to understand a customer today is becoming tech driven. That, there are surrogates through which you could actually underwrite a customer. Can I actually underwrite a customer remotely? But at the same time, you can, but it also needs to be seen in terms of the what kind of delinquencies are you actually making by not underwriting properly. So I would say that from a future perspective, we are looking in terms of using technology to understand the customer, underwrite the customer, and deliver the products to a customer in a seamless way, that all the processes that I was doing face to face, actually, if it could be done just through the technology, and then I could use the face-to-face conversation in terms of doing other meaningful aspects as part of the customer lifecycle journey.
A
Today, what is
deeper
happening is
conversation, a relationship-based conversation.
precisely a meaningful conversation in terms of what exactly does the customer need more. Today, what is happening is that it is just the one-time relationship, and on that I'm actually developing and I'm having multiple conversations, the center meetings that we do, the repayment time that we do, if it could be done, and majority of the time is spent in terms of collecting back money from the customer and meeting the customer and solving their grievances. If that can be taken, and if I could have a meaningful conversation with my customer in terms of what more does the customer want, what more does the household want, what more that I could actually do, I think that will enable the organization to be more productive.
Mr. Murthy, thank you so much for this conversation. I wanted to keep it at 45 minutes, but I think the way the conversation went, it's good that it got overshot. I mean, because they were very key insights and relevant insights and new learnings for me at least, and I hope for our listeners as well, on how customers are responding to technology. And I intended to actually start this podcast focusing on how technology impacts organizations, but it became a discussion on how technology impacts customers, which I think made for a more interesting discussion. So thank you so much for that.
No, it was pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for having given us the opportunity to share our views.